Should we simply spread democracy everywhere in the world? That's a question that was asked in the 19th century when people were marveling at the birth of democracy, republicanism, and democracy in the United States. It's what led Alexis de Tocqueville to go to the United States to study the democratic spirit as it was manifesting itself in this young republican nation. And de Tocqueville's one of his first recommendations in Democracy in America is that we shouldn't think that what's happening in the United States should simply be exported everywhere in the world. De Tocqueville said that, first of all, the people of the United States were shaped over centuries, practicing in democratic institutions. It came out of the church structure, the town structure, the state structure. As those institutions were built up in the United States, democracy was enabled to grow the way it had, and its institutions were able to develop in the United States the way it did because there was a small population to start. Things essentially started from scratch. Also, because of the distance and the time that it took between the United States and England, the Americans had to make a lot of decisions on their own. They had to make institutions on their own to determine the common good. And so de Tocqueville says, by no means should we think that tomorrow, or the next day, or the next year, or maybe even in the next century, can we simply come up with or cook up democratic institutions in societies where the democratic institutions have not been built up over time. De Tocqueville thought it takes years, sometimes centuries, to build up the practices, the habits, the culture, the customs, to support democratic institutions. And of course, failing those republican or those democratic institutions, the best thing to do might be to keep whatever's in place in place. So for example, it could be the case that we should keep the king in England, or the king in France, or keep the Tsar in Russia, or something like that. We can't just do away with bureaucracies that have existed and have worked for centuries, thinking that just like that, we can create democratic bureaucracies. This didn't happen overnight in the United States, and it certainly is not going to happen overnight in countries where there are centuries, generations, centuries of political habits, ways of thinking, culture that have been built up using, for example, a king, maybe a parliament, and other institutions within those societies. So de Tocqueville said, by no means should we take Democracy in America to be a book that should lead us to simply try to practice democracy everywhere right away. It could lead to fatal mistakes, as we saw in the Arab Spring of 2011. But this doesn't mean that we're not committed to republicanism and democracy being built up over time and in the ways that are appropriate to the various cultures, ways of thinking, and habits of the various nations on the earth. Thank you very much.